Okay, everybody, slight change of plan. We are back Facebook Live in the same place. Sorry if any of you have just dropped off. I saw the numbers just dropped by about 20 just to see what we did. The bandwidth at the moment it's 6 p.m. in the United Kingdom, and everybody's on the internet watching Netflix and everything like that, stuck at home. And I don't have the bandwidth to control the machine in Australia strong enough to trust that we could get back onto Facebook. And as we've only been going for 4 hours in this stream, we'll keep going for a few more hours, and we'll try in a little bit. So for our next clinic, we have back to the New Haven. It's a secret interest of mine, the New Haven Railroad, and we're joined by Chris Adams from Connecticut, from Essex, Connecticut. I think you're still in Essex, aren't you, Chris?
That's right. Oh, no, Old Saybrook.
Old Saybrook. Okay, got to get this right. Not far away.
There you go.
Next town over, but we can't be on the wrong side of the tracks. Okay.
Right.
So Chris is there, sat in the headquarters of the New Haven Railroad Historical Society, and Chris is going to give his clinic on his railroad and why he modelled the Valley Line. So it's enough of me. We'll hand over to Chris. Let Chris say hi in just a second when I can control the stream a bit better. This is really slow, sorry. I'm going to just make you full screen, and then I'm going to shut up.
All right.
All right, you're on. Off you go. Thanks, mate.
Thank you, Gordy. Thank you so much for you and your team and everything that you've been doing for this stream. This is really an amazing opportunity for folks that are shut in all over the world to attend a convention, get out of their house, even if just virtually, to mix with their friends and see some of this great content. So hopefully you are seeing the first slide. I think you are, of the first slide of the presentation. Modeling the Valley Line using prototype inspiration and information to model a Southern New England branch line. You may have seen me on the internet, either at my Facebook group, which I just started a few months ago at the Valley Local. Please consider joining that if you're on Facebook. If you're not, you can certainly catch me on the World Wide Web, www.thevalleylocal.net. And I also blog. I have a blog that links to that website as well. So you'll want to be sure and check that out. So just to kick things off for now, I want to ask you a question. What inspires you? What inspires you to model a particular prototype? Is it someplace you've been on vacation, maybe? A particular photograph or scene that you really want to replicate? Maybe you read something in a book. And let's see, I don't know if this is this coming through on the feed? Okay, I guess it's just a little bit delayed. So anyway, maybe it was a book that inspired you wanting to recreate a railroad. Maybe it was a movie. Maybe you saw a movie on YouTube or on Netflix, and you thought, oh, you know, really want to recreate that railroad. Well, guess what? I model the New Haven Railroad. You see all the inspiration there. But whenever you want to model the New Haven Railroad, what does that even mean to model the New Haven Railroad? Are you going to model the heavy 4-track main line under the wire, the catenary between New Haven and New York? Maybe you're going to model the New Haven Railroad by modeling the freight-only Maybrook line that was the main artery into southern New England for over 100 years. Maybe you're going to model the shoreline, heavy freight and passenger traffic down between New York City and Boston, fabled mainline thruway. Maybe you're not even really going to focus on freight at all in the New Haven. Maybe you're going to focus on one of the many named passenger trains. New Haven Railroad was actually one of the few railroads that actually made money on its passenger service, hauling people between New York, Boston, Springfield, Massachusetts, and all the commuters. First or second heaviest commuter traffic in the country. This is the New Haven. So what are you going to model? Look at that web of of lines all over the place in southern New England. It was really, other than a small branch line in the central Vermont, it was really the only railroad in southern New England. And you can see the Maybrook line that goes from Poughkeepsie over the Poughkeepsie Bridge, from Maybrook over the Hudson, down to New Haven, up to Boston, which is off the screen up to the upper right. Got New York City down in the lower left. But look at all those branch lines. Retail railroading. This is where the railroad met the customer on a very personal basis. And it's really that I want to model. That's what epitomizes the New Haven to me, is the branch lines, the lowly local way freights, where you know the crews by first name, the shippers all along the way. Speaking of first names, that's Bill Beaupre on the left. He's the engineer. That is Dave Corsair on the right. He's the fireman. This is summer of 47, maybe. A John Wallace photo. You'll hear more about John a little bit later. He took a lot of the photos that you'll see in the presentation today. And this is the GP7 of the steam era on the New Haven, a K1 class mogul. And this is shot at the Wethersfield station area. So in modeling the New Haven, I've got, just like everybody else, you got to come up with your layout givens and druthers. So obviously it has to be New Haven Railroad prototype. I really like operations. I like the idea of being able to go out in the morning, get the steam up on the engine, do all my loads and empties during the day, and then return in the evening. So I want to replicate that. Railroad also needs to be scenic with a variety of customers, to be interesting both visually and operationally. Also some motive power variety. I would like a little bit of steam, a little bit of diesel. Also traffic variety, local freights and branch lines. More of those the better, because that's really my focus. But I still want some mainline running in operations. A little bit of the taste of the real New Haven Railroad that so many people are familiar with. Pretty tall order. If you're trying to, shove all that, 5 pounds of stuff into a 1 pound barrel, it's a tall order, even if you've got a full basement. So what I did is I narrowed it down to the New Haven Railroads Connecticut Valley line. This was the line that ran along the Connecticut River between Hartford and Old Saybrook. North is to the top, Saybrook is down at the bottom, and along the Long Island Sound. Actually, the engines were serviced at the East Hartford Yard just across the river, and so they would be serviced in East Hartford and then go across to the Hartford Yards, pick up the train, and then move south through the Connecticut River Valley. The line was built between 1869 and 1872 and was absorbed by the New Haven in 1887. Passenger service ended on the line in 2 phases. The southern phase, south of Middletown to Old Saybrook, ended very early in 1930. The passenger traffic between Hartford and Middletown stuck around a little bit longer for commuter service from Middletown into Hartford, but even that ended in 1933. The airline branch was the old main line between New Haven and Boston, became secondary line after the drawbridge was put in across the Thames River in New London, Connecticut. And it went from New Haven to Boston, from the southwest to the northeast through Middletown. You can see that going through East Wallingford, Middlefield, Durham, across the river at Middletown. And then the Valley Line connected with the shoreline at Old Saybrook, down there at the bottom. The area was served by 3 local freights, 4 if you count the second local at Old Saybrook. And how does that happen? Well, you've got a local freight that comes from the north, that originates in East Hartford and works its way south, typically down to East Haddam and Moodus, which you see there just above that number 13. The airline local is the second local on the line that intersects at Middletown. It swaps cars with the Valley local at Middletown and continues on its way. And then there are 2 locals that serve Old Saybrook directly, the eastbound local between New Haven and New London, and the westbound local from New London to New Haven, and they meet in Old Saybrook. And during the era that I model, 1948, late 1940s, the New London local goes up the southern end of the Valley Line and serves the lower southern portion of the Valley Line and meets with the north end local at East Haddam. So plenty of local freights, just what I wanted. But also some main line running. I've got did some research and realized in a 24-hour period in Old Saybrook alone, over 70 trains, freight and passenger trains, going back and forth constantly through a 24-hour period through Old Saybrook. So modeling just Old Saybrook, you get a little taste of that as well. I didn't really come by the Valley Line by accident. I actually worked on this this railroad right out of high school. I graduated high school and literally the next day moved into what looks like a boxcar. It was actually an old Pullman troop sleeper, and worked on the Valley Line, the Essex steam train for 3 years as a steam locomotive fireman. That's actually a picture of me on the right. And we used to have a photography studio on site at the Valley Railroad that would take these old-timey sepia tone photographs. That's my engineer, Paul Lewis, there on the left. And another reason to model this line, it was covered by no less than Tony Custer in the May 1980 issue of Railroad Model Craftsman with this nice little vignette called The Mogul at Middletown. This is the Valley local in Middletown heading southbound. You can, you're seeing it from the walkway on the approach to the Aragoni Bridge, which is the highway bridge over the Connecticut River to the right. You're looking north in this spot. You can't actually really take this picture today, only because of all the trees that have grown up in this area, but all the houses and everything else, if you took the trees out, you could see this scene today, except for the steam-powered freight train, of course. And this was really the clincher, frankly, for me in modeling the Valley Line was John Wallace. John Wallace. He's still with us, fortunately, and still taking pictures and still coming over to the house to catalog the New Haven Railroad Historical Society's photo collection from time to time. He fired unofficially on the Valley Line in the late 40s while he was in high school, growing up right alongside the line, and he had the presence of mind to take his camera with him and took pictures of the happenings as he experienced them in the late 40s, which was awesome. He included all these pictures in a two-part series in the New Haven Railroad Society's Shoreliner magazine. Two different issues, which it's amazing what he recalled. There's a whole section in there on a typical day on the Valley Line, and the layout that I've got in my basement actually can replicate every single move that he discusses, every single bit of traffic that he discusses in that article. And I've got all the photographs to kind of back it up as well, which is amazing. And so he's been an amazing resource. Really blessed to have him. The other guy that's really been a huge help is Max Miller. Here he is cataloging the collection at my house on volunteer night. And he is the Valley Railroads historian. He has amassed binders full of different photographs and news clippings. He's even written a book on the Valley Line, which you can find on Amazon, called Along the Valley Line, and I highly recommend it. Get it before it goes out of print. But he's been really generous in loaning photographs to me for reference and inspiration, and got them plastered all over the layout for reference, all over my railroad den for enjoyment. He's been a real blessing to have as well. So those are my main sources of prototype information. The rest of them are going to be very familiar to anybody that's done any research for their railroad. You want to try and get former employees while they're still around. If you're modeling modern era, obviously that's a bit easier than if you're modeling 19th century, of course. Local experts. You'd be surprised, even folks that don't really know about railroad stuff, they may recall different industries and different traffic that were around, especially on the branch lines where, again, the retail railroading, where you met with the railroad face-to-face through the agents. A lot of these local experts, may remember some of that. Books and magazines, of course, photographs. I mean, railroad historical societies. I've mentioned the New Haven Railroad Historical and Technical Association, which is our railroad's historical society, but I highly recommend that you join your own railroad historical society as well. They'll have publications and archives that you might be able to take advantage of. Sanborn maps. You may have heard a lot about those through Tony Custer's books on layout design elements. Beware about using those. We'll maybe mention that a little bit later. Some of the potential pitfalls of using those, even though they're otherwise pretty accurate. Libraries, of course, that's the old way of doing it. Now the new way of doing it. Google's your friend. Get on the internet. And I'm really blessed. I have the Valley line going literally right past my house in Old Saybrook, and I commute along the line going from Old Saybrook to Hartford, every day. Well, we're not locked down, going to work. So I can actually get out in the field and research. A lot of people can't do that, but if you can, there's nothing like being able to get a sense of the place, the terrain, topography, just really kind of getting into the area that you're modeling. There's really no substitute for it. So now we've got the time and, well, we've got the place, but now we need the time. When you're choosing an era to model, you can model 20th century, I suppose, but you ought to have a pretty huge budget to acquire all the rolling stock and engines you need. And speaking of which, when you're choosing an era, that often depends, at least for me, on what motive power you want to run, what engines, what kind of locomotives. Well, on the New Haven, it's interesting on this particular line, 3 years, there were 3 different eras. Basically, you've got the steam era. Things on the lines where all the locals were all steam up to 1947. Transition era lasted about 12 months. In the year of 1948, you had a little bit of a mix. And then the diesel era from 1949 on, it was all diesels on the locals. So really a very tight era that I can model. But the nice thing is that the physical plant, the buildings, the structures, the industries and everything didn't change all that much, but the motive power did. So if I want to run an operating session, you'll know what year it is, whether it's 1947, 1948, 1949, depending on what engines are running that night, and also based on the paperwork, but we might get into that later. In the steam era, Valley Local was powered by that jack of all trades, the K1D Mogul, typically number 356, according to the photos. All of this information is based on photos. I try and get an engine assignment book when I can, but that's not always possible. So the airline local had a Mikado. The shoreline locals had a mix of Mikados and Moguls. And the shoreline through trains were I-4 Pacifics and I-5 Hudsons holding down the varnish, Mountains and L-class Santa Fe's on the freight trains, and DL-109s on both. The DL-109s were dual-purpose locomotives that the New Haven ordered that were delivered literally just in the nick of time in World War II. The week after Pearl Harbor, they started showing up. And New Haven ran the wheels off of them, putting them on passenger trains during the day and then flipping them around and servicing them and throwing them on a freight train at night. And they just went back and forth on both freight and passenger all through this era. Transition era, 1948, really fortunate to have a guy that attended one of my clinics some years back, asked me if I'd be interested in a report, in a motive power report that the railroad produced that he found. Yes, of course, I would very much be interested in. And what this is a report of what every single locomotive did on the railroad on April 20th, 1948. So I can tell you exactly on that day what engines the actual specific locomotive ran on the different trains on that day. Interestingly, the shoreline does a big transition in 1948. It's almost exclusively DL-109s. PAs were delivered later in 1948 in September. And interestingly also, there's still some steam. In April 20th, 1948, you would think that the name train, famous name train of New Haven, the Yankee Clipper, would have the best power, latest, most up-to-date power. Well, the eastbound version had DL-109s on it. The westbound version on this day, for some reason, had an I-5 Hudson on it. Don't know why. Would love to know the story there. Maybe there was a breakdown. Maybe they just needed to move some steam around or use up some of the service life on the steamer. I don't know, but it makes for some interesting variety. 1949 in Connecticut River Valley, all the locals are dieselized by now. S1s on the Valley local, S2s on the airline local. The shoreline locals are a mix of RS1s and S2s. Shoreline through trains, all DL109s, FAs, and PAs. It's all ALCO diesels. As far as industries, the branch line in southern New England. So, you get what you'd expect, a bulk track. A lot of people know it as a team track, universal industry. You can basically, if you don't have a siding and you need to ship or receive something, you get it at the bulk track. Coal, during the late 40s, still a lot of homes using coal for heating. There was a big coal strike, nationwide strike around this time as well that really accelerated the conversion of home heating over to oil. But at this point, it's still mostly coal. Lumber yards, feed, it's an agricultural area in the southern Connecticut River Valley, so there's lots of farms. So we got feed mills in different towns along the way. That heating oil I was telling you about before, there's a depot in Old Saybrook, as well as Valley Coal in Wethersfield has some oil as well, and we'll see some of that. So those are the general types of industries that you might expect to find on any branch line, but on the Valley line specifically, we've got a beer distributor in Wethersfield, we've got a soda bottler in Wethersfield as well. Hartford Rayon is really interesting. It's the biggest shipper in the dividend section of Rocky Hill. They actually made parachutes during World War II, and I think today the buildings are owned by Pratt & Whitney. But it was the main reason for keeping the line in service after the war was for servicing Hartford Rayon. Meach and Stoddard, really huge feed mill in Middletown, servicing the entire Middlesex County area. Middletown Meatpacking, same thing. They would receive cattle in stock cars and process the meat there. Witch hazel was a big commodity on the southern end of the Valley line in Essex. We'll see a little bit more of that later. Stanley Chemical up at the end of the East Berlin branch, that branch line that went northwest out of Middletown. The main reason for keeping that branch up was for Stanley Chemical, which made paint products and lots of brickyards along the way in that area. And finally, the Chapman Company in Old Saybrook, that was a fuel, oil, and coal dealer as well. Here's an example of some auto unloading the old-fashioned way on the bulk track in Old Saybrook. There's some stock cars in Middletown going to Middletown Meatpacking. That's the Aragoni Bridge in the background. That's the Valley Local southbound. Connecticut River's in the background. This is an interesting shot. This is a southbound Valley Local in the Gough Brooks section of Rocky Hill. But notice in the background there, you've got these steel girders, and this is probably from the summer of '47, I would expect, because those girders are for the new Baldwin Bridge that's being constructed across the lower part of the Connecticut River, taking the Connecticut Turnpike over the Connecticut River. So the Valley line was a high and wide load line. So these came down the valley on the Valley Local. Then they would be transloaded to barges in Deep River and then floated down to the job site. The Baldwin Bridge opened at the end of 1948, I think. And gliders. This is World War II era shot. These are crates of gliders by Pratt & Reed Company for the war effort, all crated up and shipped by gondola. We'll see those a little bit later in Old Saybrook. That's a lot of information, a lot of prototype information. What am I doing with it all? That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to create a time machine. I want a way to go back to and tell a story of Connecticut River Valley in the early post-war era, what it was like to live and breathe and be in this area during that era, and know what it was like to hear the whistle at night and smell the coal smoke, and get your bicycle shipped to you at the house track at the freight house, or what have you. Just getting into that era and telling the story of this area. That's what I'm trying to do with all this information. So I'm doing that in about 642 square feet in my basement, in 3.5 rooms. Thanks to Randy Hamill for the sketch. Those are my basement stairs at the bottom. You'll see Old Saybrook there at the bottom of the stairs. Off to the left is the into the shop area, which is down off map. in is New London staging. You've got Essex in the lower end of the Valley Line in the left-hand room, and the northern end of the Valley Line in the right-hand room. 170 total feet of branch line run, 62 feet of main line. I'm modeling autumn of one of those 3 years, typically 1948. I've got every town depicted from Wethersfield to Middletown, and then also the East Berlin branch, which is in the upper right-hand corner of that track plan you'll see up there in the corner of the basement. Also East Haddam, the lower end of the Valley Line, I've limited to the towns of East Haddam, Deep River, and Essex for operational purposes mostly. And then Old Saybrook as well, including the Y. The Somerset and Mill Hollow, totally fictional, which is why they're in bunny ears. Those you'll see in the upper left hand area of the track map. Those are totally fictional towns, but operationally, they operate as the airline, but they are where I have included a lot of structures that I salvaged off a dear friend's layout. If you follow the blog, Chet Reck, that's where all of his structures ended up. And Hartford, New Haven, New London, Boston, New York, the West, the South is all represented by staging. Particulars, I am not an innovator. I stand on the shoulders of others. There's nothing really innovative here. About as innovative as I get is Bill Schneider talking me into using foam-based scenery in the Essex room. But otherwise, it's cardboard strips, plaster cloth, masonite, the usual stuff. So let's do a quick tour of the Valley Line. We'll start in Wethersfield in the north. This is the Sanborn map. You'll see Wethersfield lumber there on the left. Ballantyne's is there on the right, doesn't have the siding just yet. This is looking north into Hartford staging. That is the Hartford skyline on the backdrop. That is a picture of the skyline in my era. And I had a friend of mine colorize it. So I blew it up, cut it out, put it on the masonite, and now you have an authentic Hartford skyline from the vantage point that you'd see looking up the line here. That is the Route 15 overpass. All but the railings are scratch built or resin cast. I did an article in Model Railroad Hobbyist about the resin casting the girders. My friend Dave Messer, who you'll hear more about throughout Wethersfield, sent me the parts for the abutments. That's the Hartford bypass that went over the Charter Oak Bridge. This is in process, Wethersfield lumber on the left, and that's my high sign, I guess, from the cuckoo clock that I've got 30 minutes in already. So we've got Ballantyne's on the right, and this is as it looked this morning. Wethersfield. So I've got no pictures of any of this stuff. I don't have any pictures of the lumber company. I don't have any pictures of Ballantyne's. So I've got this picture though. This is a picture of the 1936 floods, an aerial view of Wethersfield. Doesn't look that useful until you zoom in and you see Wethersfield lumber, and it confirmed for me that it does have that distinctive shed that Walters very graciously made a kit of that I used for my version of Wethersfield lumber. That's it in construction. And that's as of this morning. That house on the right was built by my friend Dave Messer, who grew up in Wethersfield. About 5 years after John Wallace, he built many of the, actually most of the structures in Wethersfield from memory and from plans that he made up. And he built this model of John Wallace's house, and it is on Fernwood Street. It is actually wasn't right against the tracks. There were, I think, 2 houses between the tracks and his house in real life, but I didn't have room for all those houses, but I did have room for John's house and wanted to be sure I included it on the railroad. And speaking of John Wallace, this is all I have of Ballantyne's beer distributor. So he did that sketch from memory, and it looked a lot to me like the Walters grocery warehouse. So I took that kit. I took off the office building off the top, used that in the right background there for a separate office building, but it looks pretty darn close, especially at least until anybody gives me any pictures, and then I'll be sure and rebuild it, but you got to show me the pictures as proof. That's in process, and that's as of this morning. Wethersfield Station, quick story about Sanborn maps. I mentioned before, beware of using them. So one of the downfalls of having somebody that actually knows the railroad you're depicting and knows it during the area you're modeling, namely John Wallace, I'm looking at you. I had done the Wethersfield Station area, all perfectly prototype. I had the house track by the stub track by the station. I had the passing track. I had the bulk track by Grey Rock, which is up there in the upper left, and was all proud of myself. And I had John over to see it, and he was suitably impressed and liked it and everything. But he said, "What's up with that passing track there?" It's like, well, it's on the map. You know, I did it perfectly, right? And he's like, well, what? You're modeling late 40s, right? It's like, yeah. It's like, well, the passing tracks were taken out when passenger service was taken out. It's like, oh, okay. So what do I do? Well, you do what you do as a prototype modeler. You're crazy like this. You rip out the passing track and you put it back the way it's supposed to be in your era. And now I've got an explanation for why what I used to think the passing track was so far away from the main line. It was because it was actually the bulk track. And the passing track is where the is in that area between the bulk track that you see there and the in the main line. So that's a mock-up of Grey Rock, and then the station is there in the lower right. That's in process. And this is as it was this morning with some scenery rough in. Wethersfield Station looking north, in process, and as of this morning. I'm going to leave some time for Q&A, so we'll flip through these a little quick. It's Grey Rock building, beautiful model done by my friend Dave Messer. And you can see the bulk track, the vacant area where the passing track used to be. I actually should put some old ties in there to depict that better. See my static graphs that I just started putting in. It's Valley Coal, heading south from Wethersfield, south end of Wethersfield near the Rocky Hill line. This is the Valley Coal area. You can see the tanks, the coal piles. That big black rectangle is the Webb Theater, which John Wallace was actually a projectionist during the 40s there. I don't depict that on my railroad because it would be right at the backdrop and basically would be just a brick wall at the backdrop. So I skipped it, but everything else is there, which we'll see in just a second. This is the only known picture that I know of Valley Coal in service. And you can see there that I used a Walther's ash hoist to kind of rough in the coal lift. And with Dave Messer's help, with the rest of the structures for the scene, that's how it looks in process and as it looks today. Well, as of this morning. Rocky Hill Station, we're continuing south. Again, north is to the right. The foundry is in the aisle on my railroad. I can't model the foundry, but that's okay. It was never served directly by rail. They got their rail shipments of pig iron and sand for casting and all that jazz, and gondolas on the bulk track that's across from the station. And you can see that here. This is looking south. The Connecticut River's off on your left. The freight house is dead center. The lower profile building is the station, and you can see the gons set out for the foundry there on the bulk track. And this is the model. Model's built by Bill Schneider, so credit to him. And more credit to Bill Schneider. He does amazing, amazing work. I'm really blessed and very ready to acknowledge all the help that I've had on this railroad. I literally could not have done it without all the help that I've had from my friends Randy and Peter and Pete and Bill and Dave and John. It's just been a really neat collaborative effort. That's the Rocky Hill Station, again, model built by Bill Schneider. Down in Cromwell, this is kind of an unfinished area, not much here, but that's the Middlesex Turnpike going from left to right, south to north. You're looking north on the Valley Line there. You can see the Middlesex Turnpike crossing in the distance. But this is interesting. You can pretty much see this view today, and whenever there's a backup on I-91 on my way into work, I'll get off on Route 99, which is the old Middlesex Turnpike, and I'll see this scene on my way into work, all except for that diner. Now, I got to tell you about the diner. I don't want to press time, but it's just too good to pass up. So first of all, it's got the octagonal windows, which is very distinctive. But what really makes this diner distinctive is called the Sunset Diner. If you're a big band aficionado, you've probably heard of Glenn Miller, but you probably have not heard of Hal McIntyre. Now, Hal McIntyre was a saxophonist in the first Glenn Miller band, and he grew up in Cromwell. If you know anything about the Glenn Miller band or its history or saw the Glenn Miller story with Jimmy Stewart, you know that first Miller band, wasn't very successful. Glenn Miller, pretty much packed it in after that first band. He was very discouraged and he swore he wasn't going to have another band. And so the band broke up, and Hal McIntyre took all the band's instruments and stored them at his parents' farm in Cromwell. Well, Hal really enjoyed being in the band, and he would pester Glenn Miller every few weeks on the phone. You got to form a new band. You got to form a new band. And Glenn was dead set against it. Then one day, out of the blue, Hal gets a call from Glenn Miller. Oh, I'm over at the diner here. I'm in Cromwell. I'm passing through. I'm at the diner. Come down. Let's have a cup of coffee. Let's meet. So Hal goes, meets Glenn Miller at the diner, and it was at that meeting that Hal finally wore him down, and Glenn agreed, to form his second Glenn Miller band. And the rest literally is history. That Miller band ended up extremely popular, had the first million-selling record in Chattanooga Choo Choo. They actually made a gold record out of it, first gold record ever, and all because of that diner, which I'm going to have a model of on my layout. There's kind of roughed in, like I said. Not much going on there. Now, don't worry, I'm not going all the way back to the beginning of construction, but since we're in Middletown now, south of Cromwell, and the hub of operations, let's just go into track planning just real quick. So here are the Sanborn maps. North again is to your right. Middletown Yard is there. You can see that, and that's on actually the beginning of the Berlin branch heading northwest out of town. A little bit south of Middletown Yard is the Diamond. That's where the airline crossed over the main line and then crossed over the Connecticut River Bridge. And then further south of Middletown, this is where Middletown Meatpacking is along the river. So this is how, I don't get out graph paper. I don't get out computers. I get out my my craft paper and just lay it out on the floor. I figured, that's a good size local. I went a prototypically long local freight. So my locals are actually 10 to 15 cars. And just lay it on the floor, see what looks good. And that's how it started. And this is, just translated up from the floor up to all the carpentry and the benchwork and the wiring. And the track is in, some mock-ups. That tower is actually a kit bashed to look like F279, which is a tower in Middletown. That was done from a Walther's kit. And this is how it looks today. A lot of these buildings came from Bill McGuire's layout. Again, collaborative effort, a lot of blessing with all the people helping out. Shalerville Bridge, the scenic highlight on the Valley Line, south of Middletown. You can almost see this scene today. It's still there. It's just obscured a lot by trees. But here is how it looks on the layout. Credit to Bill Schneider. Got me some neat stonework from Britain and roughed in that scene, along with the Shad Shack, which is still there today and being restored, and that's the Middlesex Turnpike in the foreground. East Haddam and Good Speeds. This is where the North End local and the South End local would meet and exchange cars, so I had to have that on my layout. 3 tracks. You've got the main track there on the right, the siding, which is what the South End local is coming northbound from Old Saybrook and dropping cars off on the siding, and then the bulk track and house track is the track in the weeds there on the left, as it is on the layout. Deep River, you're looking north here. This is going to be very familiar to any of those of you that have taken the Essex steam train. This is where you get the boat today to take the river cruise. And this is as it looked in late 1940s. If you look in the far distance there on the right, you can see where there's a speeder parked on the siding. That's the siding that went down to the transload of those girders from the flat cars to the barges to float down to the bridge construction site. Just out of the picture on the left is the old Piano Works, which has a lot of wedding receptions now today. It's a building that's still around today and still being used. And there it is in the far distance, built by Bill McGuire to spec and plan. So I definitely need to include that on the layout. This is as Deep River looks on the layout. Essex, big highlight on the southern end. Everybody's familiar with Essex. If you've been to the area to ride the steam train, this is the Sanborn map of the area. Compare the track. I've got just about all the tracks that were there during my era, and it's starting to rough in. I'm working my way south, but that's the Shoreline local heading back to Old Saybrook southbound. Dickinson Witch Hazel in the background, as it looks on the layout. And the Dickinson building is built by Bill McGuire as well. Beautiful, beautiful building. I actually moved the entire backdrop in order to accommodate this building because I didn't want to cut into it. And then Old Saybrook, we finally reached the south end of the line. The Saybrook station is a funny configuration because the Valley Line actually crossed the shoreline here on its way to the ritzy resort borough of Fenwick in Old Saybrook. By the late 40s, that track is out. That track got taken out in 1917, I think. But that's why the station is configured the way it is. The elevation that's facing us is the elevation that would have faced the Valley Line. The shoreline, of course, is there on the right. There's the gliders that we saw before in the crates, ready for transfer to another freight train. Chapman Company that is there on the left with the coal and oil house, freight house. The track 6 is a balloon track that goes around the back of the station and connects the shoreline at both ends. That does it look on the railroad. And here's the station and the station model. No, I didn't build these buildings. These are Bill Schneider's handiwork again. Thank God for Bill Schneider and the fact that he doesn't have a layout or didn't have a layout whenever we were doing this, because he obviously had some creative energy that he needed to burn off, and that was all to my benefit. I really appreciate it. This is the Old Saybrook scene, pretty much as you see it when you come down in the basement. There's some PAs, so this would be, and they're brand new, no weatherings, and so this would be late 1948. The O109s, same deal. And this is looking south into Old Saybrook. The Valley Line comes into Old Saybrook on a Y track, and it's a little counterintuitive because you're looking south, so west is to the right and east is to the left. So it's a little disorienting, but there's no other way I could put it in the basement. Middlesex Turnpike is cutting across there, and you see that it's dead-ended. There was a grade separation project where the turnpike was taken up and over on an overpass just east of this station site. But, you know, it was dead-ended in the late 40s, so it's dead-ended on my railroad. More of Bill Schneider's handiwork. Couldn't pass this up. This is in the tower. He did a full interior, lit, including the order board. I'm sorry, the control board in the tower. And he also photoshopped in the sky just to make it look nice. But it's an amazing scene, and I can really brag on it because I didn't really have anything to do with that scene. I host it, and I'm thankful for that. But credit to Bill for that. But I can take some credit for East Berlin, not the structures. The station on the left was built by Dave Messer. The rest of the structures in East Berlin were done by Bill McGuire that I was able to salvage off his layout. But everything else in this scene is all me. This is my first attempt at serious scenery. Nod to Tom Johnson. I hope I've done you proud. Tried to do that transition into the backdrop, the photo backdrop from the road. And thanks to my wife, since I'm a bit colorblind, she helped me with the, matching up the chalk weathering so that it would all match. But Bill McGuire does amazing work. These are all scratch built. Static grass, first time doing it, so I think it came out pretty good. It's like so much in this hobby, the more you do it, the better you get at it. I might end up redoing this at some point because I've actually gotten better at it with practice. And first time pouring any sort of river. And just a shout out to Woodland Scenic's Deep Pour Water. It's not cheap. It's I would not recommend it for a lot of water if you've got it, but it is idiot proof. Trust it, coming from this idiot. If you follow the instructions by the letter, you'll get a good result. There's no fumes, there's no bubbles. It comes out beautifully. I did do the bridge. I built and weathered the bridge. Again, except for the structures, this is all my work. But this is not my photography. Thank you to Seth Gartner for this beautiful shot. It shows the Valley Local heading back from East Berlin across the Mattabesset River, and is really captures what I'm trying to do on this layout. All the elements kind of pulled together. Don't have any time to cover a lot of the other stuff. The towns that are still in the pitch work and track phase, the dividend section of Rocky Hill where Hartford Rayon is. Actually, a little regret that I didn't think to take some pictures down there today, this morning, because the Hartford Rayon buildings Dave Messer actually built and are there, but it's just on blue foam right now. Cromwell, we talked a little bit about Cromwell and Deep River. The fictional airline town, Somerset and Mill Hollow, I did describe those a little bit before. They're totally freelance, so not really in the scope of a prototype presentation like this, but you can certainly see a lot of pictures of them on my website. They're 100% scenic, but fictional, like I said. Mainline and staging, that's really under the hood type stuff. If you want to see any of how I did that, you can check out the blog and the website. Operations, that's a whole other presentation. The coolest thing I think about the layout, and I kind of backed my way into it almost subconsciously, is that it really is a study in contrast. You've got Old Saybrook, a little slice of a very busy main line between Boston and New York, 70 trains a day, heavy passenger, heavy freight. And then you've got these little lowly weed-covered branch lines. You know, I've got the static grass between the rails. I mean, it's a whole different vibe. If you're on a branch line local, you got nothing to worry about. If you're down on the main line, you've got trains on a 3-to-1 fast clock or 4-to-1 fast clock going every few minutes. And the only local is the local coming from New London staging through Old Saybrook up the valley. And that one, you get a little bit of everything. You got to keep out of the way of all the main line traffic. But boy, as soon as you get your orders to go up the valley branch, you can take a deep breath and just relax, because you own the railroad, at least all the way up to East Haddam, or as far as your train orders give you authority. And I like, speaking of train orders, I like to do the paperwork. You know, people have a love-hate relationship with that, but I don't mind being a clerk on a railroad. It's kind of fun work. It's a session before the session, and it really scales nicely. It's the same paperwork whether your trains are 1/87th scale or full size. So it's in that sense, it's the most prototypical job on the entire layout. If you do want more information, you can certainly check out the website. It's at www.thevalleylocal.net. You need the W's, you need the net. Otherwise, you won't find it. You could also check out the Facebook group, The Valley Local. I accept all legitimate requests. I don't accept from strange people in Bosnia that have questionable images on their site. If they have no railroad thing tie, I don't accept those, but pretty much accept everybody else. And that'll do it for now. I just got a text from somebody that the feed may have gone down. I hope it didn't. I hope things are okay, but I really appreciate Gordy Robinson and NMRA social media group putting this on. This has been just a really cool opportunity for everybody that is shut in and locked down to participate and actually enjoy seeing some of these layouts that you just wouldn't see otherwise. I mean, I woke up at 3 this morning and checked out something going on in Australia. I mean, it's, as much as I love going back in time in the Connecticut River Valley in the late 40s, in a lot of ways we live in the most amazing time now. You can do all this stuff. So thank you again so much.
Thank you, Chris. I'm not sure if we're done or not, but since we're still recording, how about we answer a few of the questions that we saw? Of course,
Okay.
if you get the opportunity presented, would you get back in the cab?
Oh, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I I have one of two signatures that I need to be qualified as a diesel engineer over on the valley, but I got sidetracked when my day job actually got really busy one year with a big impasse, and I kind of fell off the beam on that a few years ago. So I need to re-up that a bit if I can and find the time to do that. But yeah, absolutely. Although I'd like to do the right-hand side of the cab. Yeah, I'm 51. Firing isn't as easy as it was when I was 18.
Sweet. Joey wanted to know which major industries will you use on the line for the most operations? I'm not sure if the question was early.
Okay. Let's see. I guess it would have to be Hartford Rayon. Hartford Rayon has a funny track arrangement. There's a switchback that that serves the factory and the warehouse, and there's a separate tank track for bringing in tank cars. Plus, there's no runaround. Any of the runaround has to be done north in Rocky Hill, just like on the prototype. The dividend section of Rocky Hill, Hartford Rayon was about a mile south of the runaround, and they would actually have to put cars on the pilot of the engine to do the switching. But then, other than that, it's not industries per se, but the switching in Middletown Yard. There's a lot of there's a high concentration of industries and swapping with the airline local in Middletown Yard. So that's the other real hot spot.
So Andy wanted to know in which month in NMRAx was your article about the casting for the bridge, but I do believe someone answered the question.
Okay, good. Because I don't remember actually. I know that I did have an article on detailing a New Haven RS2 that came out last September. That was the most recent article. But the resin casting article, I think, may have been last summer, but it's easy enough to find if somebody hasn't answered that already.
Okay, Bruce wants to know the rails going into staging in Wethersfield are ballasted in brown. He presumes that's prototypical. Do you know what the actual rock is?
Okay, that's a great question. Well, you caught me. The ballast that's brown north of that's right near the overpass there is actually dirt from the area that I sifted, and but yeah, when you put the glue and water mix on it, it just really darkened up. The prototype actually reballasted the line with trap rock from Hartford to Middletown in the summer of 1945. So coming south from that brown portion that was mentioned, you'll see that there's trap rock. But because I'm modeling autumn of 1948, it's been a few years. They don't have good maintenance or sprayers. You'll see some weeds coming up in the ballast. But south of Middletown, it's going to be hardly any ballast at all. It's dirt and sand basically, and weeds.
Cool. So the rest of the questions are not really questions. It's more comments like, for someone who claims he is no good at scenery, yours looks pretty great.
That may be somebody from the Modeler's Life podcast, because I get that ribbing a lot. It's coming along. I'm glad that I'm developing some skill in that area. It's a heavy lift for me. I'm really left-brained, so this artistic right brain process comes really hard to me. So it takes an inordinate amount of time to do, but I am happy with the result, notwithstanding the amount of time that it's taking.
Oh, that is great news, because someone wants to know what happens when Mr. Snyder gets his own layout.
Well, progress on the Valley Line is probably going to cease for a couple of years. I've got a lot of reimbursement I've got to come up with as far as time and effort. I'm pretty good with bench work and track work. I've had a lot of practice doing bench work and track work and wiring, having hardly ever gotten beyond that stage in my layouts. This is the only one that I've ever actually gotten to scenery on. So I'll be able to help him with the early stages. But after that, structures, he's on his own.
Sweet. Well, Chris, thank you very, very much. That was lots of fun watching. and you should go to the Facebook feed and see how many people gave you compliments there. So
I sure
like them
will.
all.
Thanks so much, everybody. I really appreciate it.